Food, it's a set of relationships. It connects you to the farmer who grew it. It connects you to the animals or the plants. It connects you to the soil. It connects you to the workers who prepared it. So there's a lot at stake when you sit down to eat. Over the last 2 decades, thanks to some books and movies like The First Food, Inc., something called the food movement got started. People became keenly interested in where their food comes from. How is it produced? Today, farmers' markets are everywhere. And even in the supermarket, you can buy organic food, grass-fed, GMO-free. So we thought we could create a food system aligned with our values. But the food industry is dominated by a small handful of very large and very powerful companies. In normal times, the power of the food industry, of the monopolies that dominate it, is invisible to most of us. But when the pandemic hit, the curtain was peeled back, and you began to see that this highly efficient, consolidated food system is a very brittle system. There were whole crops being buried, hogs being euthanized because they couldn't be processed, farmers disposing a flood of milk. At the same time, there were shortages in the supermarket, and then people were lining up for miles because they were hungry. So this consolidated food system could not adapt to the changes coming so fast. We have built a system that depends on predictability. And the one thing we can't count on is predictability anymore. We need a system that is more resilient than the one we have. You know, we really thought we could change the food system one bite at a time. And as important as that is, it's not enough. There's more we have to do.
I have been working in the fields since I was a kid, harvesting different crops. I heard about Immokalee back in Mexico. People were talking about If you go to Immokalee, you are gonna earn $70 a day. And that was just a flat out lie of recruiters trying to just bring people with those false pretenses. Working in the fields, it's mainly Latino workers and Haitian workers. The industry wants immigrant workers because they feel that they can take advantage of us.
If you eat fresh fruits and vegetables, you're connected to immigrants who are being paid poor wages and being mistreated. My whole entry into the world of food and food systems was trying to understand how in the 20th and the 21st century, we could be abusing and exploiting the poorest workers in the United States who are responsible for the healthiest foods that we eat. In Immokalee, at the height of the pandemic, state government did absolutely nothing to protect these workers. In fact, the state government in Florida even prevented contact tracing because if they found people who had COVID, they'd have to remove them from the workforce. The idea was, let's not know who's sick and get as much harvested as possible.
You know, we're feeding the country, so our work is essential, but we as people were treated as disposable.
Iowa's always recognized as a flyover state. Those of us that live here understand that there's security in that. Good morning.
Take that country omelet on, please.
How are you guys? It's my job to protect 135,000 citizens in Black Hawk County.
Very much appreciate your support for the college.
You bet. There's hardworking, blue-collar, good, honest, salt-of-the-earth type people here.
Here we go. Ham and cheese.
Thank you. No, this is great. Appreciate it. Thank you. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were fearful what we were going to face. And all of a sudden, we had people testing positive in our clinics here. Almost all of our contact tracing pointed back to the Tyson meatpacking plant. So this is the Tyson plant. Tyson's is one of the larger employers here. They bring income and they provide jobs. You don't want to alienate them. But our disease surveillance officer, public health director, and myself went into that plant. We saw people working elbow to elbow and reaching over the top of each other, and no masks, no regulation, no real concerted policy on how to protect each other. And then we're hearing from people that, you know, they're stepping back off the line, puking on the floor, going right back to work. We walked out of there, all of us just going, oh my God, this is horrible. We are in so much trouble. By the end of the month, they had 1,300 positives out of 2,500 employees. And then it started to seep out of the plant into our community. You know, we had exponential increases in the numbers of deaths by day, not by week, not by month, but by day. We wanted the 10 to 14 day shutdown of the plant, but Tyson made it very clear to us that it just wasn't going to happen.
The meatpacking industry was worried that local public authorities were going to shut down their slaughterhouses. So John Tyson wrote a letter that was published in newspapers across the United States, raising a fear that we might start running out of meat. And then the meatpacking companies went to the president to keep their slaughterhouses open.
We're working with Tyson. We are. We're going to sign an executive order today, I believe.
2 days after the Tyson letter, the Trump administration issued an order under the Defense Production Act to ensure that the plants would keep running. So the industry got the President of the United States to do exactly what it wanted. It even helped write the executive order that he issued. It's a total perversion of the Defense Production Act to use it to allow a company to do what it wants to do. The whole point of the act is to force companies to do things they might not want to do to serve the American public.
Tyson says that they were doing this to feed America, but we know that a lot of their meat goes to China and overseas. We also know that Tyson had a banner year. That's blood money. They didn't care about our citizens, and way too many people paid the price for that.
I am Agriculture USA. Born in freedom, I have become the greatest provider in all history. I am the spirit of progress. I am a way of life, the American way.
During the Cold War, we talked about why our system was so much superior to that of the Soviet Union. And it was the free market that was supposedly responsible for the greatness of this country. The 1950s into the early 1960s was a period of rising wages for American workers. It's the greatest period of the growth of the middle class in American history. And those things are connected to having real competition and strict antitrust enforcement. The basic idea behind antitrust policy is that no one company, that no two companies should dominate an entire sector of our economy. There was strict antitrust enforcement for decades under both Democratic and Republican administrations. In the 1940s, there was an antitrust suit against A&P. Their 14% of the market for groceries was considered a threat to competition. But one of the big monopolies that endured was AT&T. It was argued that we couldn't break it up because we needed one company to control all the phone lines.
The country in the long run will be sorry, and I find it difficult to believe that things will work as well in the future as they have worked in the past.
But then AT&T was broken up, and pretty soon there were huge reductions in the cost of making a long-distance call. That opened the way for cellular phones, modems, and the whole internet economy we have today. So breaking up monopolies is directly linked to creating innovation. Around 1980, antitrust enforcement was greatly reduced. It was argued that if prices were low, then it didn't matter how much control over a market one company had. Those views came to be government policy. Corporations began to buy up their competitors, and they got bigger and bigger and bigger. Back then, the four largest beef companies controlled only 25% of the market. Today, the four largest beef companies control 85% of the market. 3 companies control 83% of the cold cereal market. 2 companies control 70% of the carbonated soft drink market. 2 companies control 80% of the baby formula market. Why do companies buy up their competitors? It's because they don't want to compete. And when they don't have to compete, consumers have to pay more, farmers and ranchers get paid less, And the difference goes to those corporations as higher profits. But that's not the only problem. A highly consolidated market becomes a fragile market. In 2022, when Abbott had to shut down a single factory, 43% of the nation's baby formula was suddenly off the shelves. And mothers had to start scrambling to find food for infants.
There's no formula within like 3 hours of where we live. I haven't been able to find formula for like a month. I've been going to stores like almost every day, every other day.
What are our options here? What do y'all want people to do? Because I don't know about y'all, but this is scary.
When you have monopoly power over baby formula and one company has a problem at one factory, suddenly some infants don't get to eat.
Wisconsin is the dairy state. It's not an accident. It makes sense that we're producing dairy here. We have good access to water. We have good growing seasons. So this is a really great place to have animals and produce milk.
Hello there, ladies.
Dairy is really in the blood of Wisconsin farmers, but it's crushing us right now. We've just had continually low prices paid to us for our milk.
We are considered a medium-sized farm by Wisconsin standards. When I married my husband in 2007, we were only milking 250 cows, and now we're at 450. And that's because we're just trying to run faster to keep our head above water.
Farmers are overproducing, which is leading to a lower price. And what people do and what the bank tells me to do is to just keep trying to produce more.
We kind of create a vicious cycle because then we're producing more and more, and then the price is going down, and then we're producing more to try to stay afloat. It's really a disaster.
I think that we're huge at 450 cows. And then we're trying to compete with these 1,000 cow dairies. And they're looking at the 5,000 cow dairies. And then the 5,000 cow dairy is trying to compete with the 10,000. And now you hear about 20,000 cow dairies, 30,000 cow dairies. Where does it stop? Now there are fewer and fewer processors because they've all merged with each other. So it used to be that if I didn't like the price, I could find other processors to buy my milk. But now, because of consolidation, I can't move my milk to another place with a better price. We've lost half of our dairy farms in Wisconsin since 2007. Lots of people going bankrupt. The corporate control pushing folks like us to just throw up their hands and say, I'm done.
The food system is often at war with nature. And one of the great examples is when you watch the dairy industry move from wet, grassy places like Wisconsin and Vermont to deserts like California and Arizona. How could this possibly make sense? Well, as dairies get bigger, they move to places where there are very few regulations, where land is cheap, and you can grow crops to feed your cattle all year round. But the environmental cost of this is insane. The rain will oblige you in Wisconsin and grow the grass for you. But in the desert, this is water that must be pumped deep out of the aquifers to irrigate the crops and hydrate the cattle. These mega dairies are rapidly draining the water table and the Colorado River. and leaving neighboring communities without drinking water. So the logic of capitalism and the logic of nature are at war. It's a classic example of profits over sustainability.
My great-great-grandfather, he settled here in 1894. My dad came in 1975 and farmed for the next 40 years. And then I took over the operation. Things have really changed just from my father's time to mine.
In Iowa, we used to grow a multitude of crops. 100 years ago, we used to have apple orchards, and every farm had livestock. But when you drive across Iowa now, you can see nothing but commodity crops, corn and soybeans.
Because those are the crops the government subsidizes. And that's why farmers do what they do, is they follow the policy because they're in business to make money, just like everyone else. But the thing that is not factored into that is what is the result to the land. Our best resource here in Iowa is the richest soil in the world. But because of the intensive farming that we've done, half of our topsoil is already gone. We're losing soil faster than we're making it. And I get reminded of this every year as I'm farming next to the fence lines. And you can see a drop-off between the fence line and your field level, and that tells you exactly how much soil you've lost. I think any Iowa farm boy growing up wants to farm full-time. But I farm about 300 acres, and 300 acres is not enough to feed a family comfortably. So I work off the farm, as do a lot of folks.
How's a load of seed sound here later this morning? Stop by and drop that off.
I sell seed, and I sell farm inputs, chemicals to help eliminate pests and weeds.
So let's look at this field here. We've got a lot of potential value.
And I make recommendations to use synthetic fertilizers to get the highest return off of their land. So I make my living from what a lot of people would call the industrialized food system. However, I have big concerns about the future.
That's 40 bags. Okay.
If we stay on this path where we continue to subsidize commodity crops, that's not good for the long term of our farming communities, our soils, our water quality. So I'm trying to come up with a whole new system so farmers like myself can grow things in a way that changes the rules of the game.
Hi. Senator, how are you?
I'm very good.
Nice to meet you,
Nice
sir.
to meet you as well. Farmer Steve, I'm farming. All right, all right. Corey.
We're thrilled to be able to have Senator Cory Booker appointed earlier this year to the Senate Agriculture Committee.
You have no idea how exciting it is for me to be standing here in a field in my own state. It was 15 years ago this month that I was elected to be the mayor of New Jersey's largest city. If you would have told me 15 years ago that I would use every point of leverage I had in the Senate to become a member of the Ag Committee, I would have not believed you. I want you to know I am so excited to have the top of my agenda right now dealing with America's food system, which is savagely broken. I've come at this through lived experience. I watched what our food systems were doing to my family members and to my community.
Being on the ground as a local leader, I started seeing that the systems within Newark were really failing kids, families, where they didn't have access to healthy foods. These foods were being pushed in a way that seemed to me to prey upon low-income people.
They need the cheapest food possible. But they're living in the middle of a food desert where a Twinkie product is cheaper than an apple. African-American kids, in the last decade alone, have seen their diabetes rates double. So it just made me want to drastically change the food systems for then my community, but now of fixing the broken food systems in the United States and globally.
This part of Montana is a place where buffalo had a hard time surviving. But you can actually raise a hell of a crop here.
In fact, I was supposed to finish seeding my peas today, but as you can tell, best laid plans, things don't tend to work when it gets cold, including me.
I never felt appreciated as a farmer. I raised food, but food was treated like a commodity. It wasn't treated like something you'd eat. And I said to my wife, if we don't do something to improve our profit margin, we're going to be selling out just like everybody else. I would say there's about 150 bushel in the truck. In the late 80s, we converted to organics, and we raised durum for organic noodles. It was the first time since we had been farming that I actually felt like I was doing something that people appreciated, that people wanted. But now we're seeing an all-out attack on family farm agriculture. The corporate business model is killing rural America. It's killing it. And that's not the way it should be. There needs to be people living out here producing food. But as far as changing things, there's really only one place you can do that, and that's Washington, D.C.
We've seen a mass exodus off the land. In my small town, as an example, when I graduated from high school, there was 1,000 people in that town. Now there's about 600. There were 2 hardware stores. Now there are none. There were 3 grocery stores. Now there's 1. And maybe the most distressing is there were 5 bars, and now there's only 2.
I'm in the Senate's only working farmer. And I want rural America to be vibrant again. That's my motivation here.
Testa!
Booker!
How you doing, man?
Good to see you.
Jon Tester he's been a mentor to me in the Senate. He early on talked to me about the absurdities in the ag world. It's this odd combination of a guy from Montana and a guy from New Jersey, and yet we have so much common ground.
If you want to reestablish rural America again, if you want to have people that are able to live there, you got to have opportunity. Yeah. And if you're going to have opportunity, then you got to have fair prices. But when you have consolidation, now you've got people setting prices. They can go out on a golf course and play around a golf and determine what you're going to get for a bushel of wheat or whatever you're talking about. But as long as we're doing nothing, you're going to continue to see more consolidation, and you're going to continue to see the demise of the family farm.
So in many ways, they're picking winners and losers. The winners are their handful of multinational corporations. The losers is all the rest of us.
We are so connected. The challenges in my community are directly connected to a system that's driving farmers out of business, hurting our soil and our rivers, hurting the food workers, hurting the end consumers. And as a nation, we are dramatically subsidizing with our tax dollars the foods that are making us sick. And only a small fraction of our subsidies go to the healthy, fresh foods that we should be eating as a majority of our diet. I don't want the government to be telling someone what to eat, but I sure as heck don't want my tax dollars subsidizing the things that are making people sick, and now we have to pay for the healthcare costs of the chronic disease that we're fueling with our food system. So this is a conundrum to me.
We have here the world's largest potato.
I'll say that's a large potato.
And here's what's in it.
I've had a long career about looking at food and nutrition as ways to examine really important problems in society. Food connects to everything. By the 1980s, agricultural production had increased so much in the United States that the number of calories in the food supply increased to about 4,000 calories a day per person. And that's twice as many calories available in the food supply as anybody needs. This puts enormous pressure on food companies. How are they going to sell? Food companies are businesses with stockholders to please. The profits have to get bigger and bigger. Sales have to increase and increase. And food companies figured out lots of ways to do that.
Wendy's Baconator is the ultimate bacon cheeseburger.
They opened up fast food places all over the world. They made foods in larger portions.
One enormous sandwich.
If you are presented with a very large amount of food,
our biggest entrees ever.
All of the research shows that you're going to eat more from that portion than you would if you were given a small portion. And then food companies made foods available any place that you could think of. You go into a clothing store and there's candy bars at the checkout counter.
Hot donuts with Kentucky Fried Chicken.
So food companies are doing everything they can to get people to eat anytime, any place, day or night, in large portions. What better way to sell foods, whether people need it or not?
It's time for fourth meal, the late night meal, between dinner and breakfast.
So I think it's just very hard to resist a food environment that is just yelling at us all the time, eat more, eat more, eat more.
In the 1980s, I worked as a pediatrician in the outskirts of São Paulo. Since then, we have observed a decline in child malnutrition and an increase in obesity. We had in Brazil each year 1 million new cases of obesity. Our research found a decline in the purchase of salt, cooking oils, table sugar, and then you say, well, these are supposed to be the determinants of obesity, right? If they are declining, this does make sense. But then we realized that traditional whole foods like rice and beans were being replaced by soft drinks, packaged snacks, sausages, instant noodles. All these products are formulations of nutrients and additives. Colors and flavors, emulsifiers, artificial sweeteners. These are chemical compounds totally unknown to our metabolism. And these foods are submitted to intensive processing. So we decided to call this food group ultra-processed foods. We raised the hypothesis that consumption of ultra-processed food could be the main driver of diabetes and other chronic diseases. In 2019, one researcher, Kevin Hall, decided to test our hypothesis.
I was first pretty skeptical of this idea. And I would ask, what is it about ultra-processed foods that causes people to overeat? Is it the nutrients that's driving this? Or perhaps it's something about the processing of these foods? So I decided to design two diets. In the ultra-processed diet, we had 80% of calories coming from ultra-processed foods, whereas in the minimally processed diet, we had 0% of calories from ultra-processed foods. But the meals were matched for the calories, matched for salt, sugar, fat, fiber, and protein. We told people to eat as much or as little as desired. When people were exposed to this ultra-processed diet, they ended up eating about 500 calories per day more compared to the mostly unprocessed diet.
Usually in studies of this type, you find a difference of 30 to 50 calories a day, but 500? I mean, that's an unbelievable result.
On the ultra-processed diet, people gained weight and gained body fat, and when we switched them to the unprocessed diet, those people spontaneously lost weight and lost fat. And so this study suggests that there's something else about ultra-processed foods, independent of the salt, the sugar, and the fat, and the fiber, that's driving people to overeat.
The easiest way to explain the different categories of processing is corn. Corn on the cob, unprocessed. It's been peeled and washed. Canned corn, minimally processed, salt has been added. But Dorito chips have color, texture, and flavoring additives, ultra-processed.
Processed food you can make at home. Ultra-processed foods, you don't have the ingredients, you don't have the additives, and you don't have the machines.
The reason you process food is not that there's anything wrong with it in its natural state, it's that you make a lot more money. You know, the money in the system is not at the farm end. The farmer is getting less than 15% of your food dollars. No, the money is going to the processor who's benefiting from the fact that we're overproducing and driving down the cost of raw materials. The food processors buy those cheap agricultural commodities and then turn it into the panoply of ultra-processed food products in your supermarket. If you complicate that food in the form of flavor or novelty, that's where the money is.
Ultra-processed food assures that a consumer will buy more and more and more because these products are made to be consumed in excess.
Eating worked pretty well for humans for an awfully long time. We ate what we needed, our needs were in balance with our appetite. And it's really only recently that something about our relationship with food got disturbed, distorted. Now we find ourselves literally eating ourselves to death. Animals have similar nutritional needs to ourselves, so what do? They, on some intuitive level, know what to eat. It's called nutritional wisdom. These mama cows are over in this field eating alfalfa because that's rich in protein, and they're supporting a fetus, so they need the protein. But these steers, they're over here in this field and they're eating ryegrass, which has got sugar and carbohydrates in it because they're laying on fat. And they do this on their own. They're somehow attracted to the food they need. And humans are no different. Millions of years ago, our ancestors walking around the jungles of Africa, there was no label on the fruit that they ate. They didn't know about the calories. But this experience of just looking for the food that tasted the best is what nourished them. It's how they had a nutritious diet. You think of something like a delicious peach, that flavor that we experience is the brain's system of analyzing the nutrition that's within a food. Flavor is nature's language of nutrition. For decades now, we've been manipulating the sensory characteristics of food. Thanks to flavor technology, we can make anything we want taste like whatever we want it to taste like. Fake flavors, but also artificial sweeteners. We haven't really questioned what the consequences of this has been. We've just assumed it's a good idea. Well, now we have new research that is showing that this is actually a terrible idea, that we're actually interfering with the brain's and the body's ability to metabolize food.
My interest is in how the brain processes food reward. I did the first neuroimaging study of feeding in humans. We were measuring brain response as they were eating little pieces of chocolate. I really wanted to understand areas of the brain that represent the pleasure of the food. Pepsi was interested in our research. I think they wanted to try to understand how to make healthier foods. And so they came to me with a question. Is it possible to decrease the amount of calories in a typical sugar-sweetened beverage without compromising reward? So in the lab, we created a series of beverages where we manipulated the sweetness independent of calories. So that way we have equally sweet drinks, but drinks of different calorie amounts.
You're going to be receiving liquids through the mouthpiece, okay?
We looked at the brain's areas that are responsible for reward. What we thought was that the highest calorie beverage would become the most liked beverage, but that's not what we found. Instead, it was actually the middle doses, where sweetness and calories are matched, that was eliciting the greatest brain response. In nature, the relationship between sweetness and energy is pretty stable. So when you manipulate sensory information without regard for the nutritional content, you're essentially creating mismatches. And so we conducted follow-up studies to see what was going on.
Comfortable under there?
Yep. And what we found was that when sweetness matches the calories, then the body metabolizes that energy. But when something was too sweet for the amount of calories or not sweet enough for the amount of calories, the body's ability to metabolize those calories was blunted. Those calories are not being used as a fuel. Instead, they might be converted into fat. So if you reduce calories by adding artificial sweetener, you could actually be doing more harm than good. When I saw the findings, I shared it with our collaborators at Pepsi right away. But this result that I thought was super exciting, because we're gonna learn something new, this is really cool, had the opposite effect that I thought it was gonna have. I received a bunch of emails from Pepsi saying that the data made no sense, really saying that they didn't believe what we were reporting. They pulled our funding. And it wasn't until much later that I realized the problem was not that they didn't believe me, but in fact that they did believe me. And that's what made them worried. The moment you know that something is bad for health, ethically you have to correct it. I think they wanted deniability, because what our research suggested is that their products could negatively impact health in unanticipated ways.
When you walk into a supermarket, it's not just artificial sweeteners. There's a whole arsenal of additives designed to mislead the brain. There's fat replacers, artificial flavors, so-called natural flavors. So how does your brain react when it keeps getting fooled by the food it eats? The best way to think about it is the fuel gauge on your car. Imagine if you looked at it and said it was full, but it might be empty, it might be half full. Imagine it was uncertain in the way that modern food has become uncertain. What would you do? Well, you'd fill your car up a whole lot more often. Well, that's what your brain does. When it keeps getting fooled, when one day sweetness means calories and the next day it means no calories or just some calories, it goes, I better eat more food to make sure I don't get ripped off.
We're short-circuiting an evolutionary process that's hundreds of thousands of years old. And we've learned through the ingenuity of food science to fool the human body. But you pay a price for that in losing your taste for real food. And as we lose our taste for eating plants, we lose all those antioxidants, we lose all those protective factors. When you have that pre-made meal, it's hard to know that it's unhealthy, but it's all been designed to manipulate you, the eye, the taste buds, and get you to eat as much as possible, ideally to addict you to it.
In the United States, the average consumption of ultra-processed food is about 58% of total energy intake. But in most of the world, consumption of ultra-processed food is much lower. And most calories still come from real foods. Today, these big food companies, they are targeting markets in many countries with aggressive campaigns.
That could be you right now.
These countries are not prepared to defend themselves from the health problems created by ultra-processed foods.
Breakfast time is Kellogg's time. Breakfast is Kellogg's.
I have worked in fast food for over 20 years. I've worked at McDonald's, I've worked at Popeyes. I'm currently at Taco Bell. I have 2 children. My kids are my world, but it's been hard. There have been times I can't afford the heating bill. There have been times where I can't afford to pay my rent. There's been times where I couldn't afford to put food on the table. I have a gas bill, a light bill, internet bill, rent $715. If I miss a day, one of these becomes a shut-off notice, a disconnect notice. My biggest fear is winding back up in a position that I had to crawl out of and living out of my car and living away from my children. This is everything we own. Our clothes, shoes. This is me and my family's prized possessions. It's all we own. I don't ever want my family to have to experience that again, but it's hard on the wages we make, and it's almost impossible for us just to survive. Most people would say that these jobs are for people that are just starting out, but the average fast food worker is a 30-year-old woman, not a kid. This is someone's mother, someone's sister, trying to make it to feed their family.
Oh, geez, I'm supposed to read on a regular coffee for $4.10 today.
The cost of living is steadily going up, but our wages aren't. How could I go to work for these billion-dollar companies and feed all these people, all to come home to hear my son's stomach growl? But for the ones that has all the sauce on them, they're cheap.
$4.
So right now we are $13.97.
All righty.
I do not get sick leave. I do not get health care. As an adult, I've never been able to afford to see a doctor.
I got 20, 40, 60.
I'm tired. And nobody knows how tired I am except for those people that go through it just like me.
Today, the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. It's been at that level since 2009. Adjusted for inflation, it's almost 50% lower than it was in the late 1960s. So the poorest workers have seen their pay cut in half. The CEO of Yum Brands, which owns Taco Bell, earns more in an hour than the typical Taco Bell worker earns in a year. And we're paying so that they can have cheap labor. Walmart and McDonald's are 2 of the largest employers of workers who are dependent on food stamps and on Medicaid. So it's taxpayers who are supporting these companies as opposed to these companies supporting their workers. It's not only fast food and supermarket workers, it's millions of other workers in the food system who are being exploited in ways that are hidden from view.
The agricultural industry depends on more than 3 million workers. Agriculture has always been a place where exploitation has happened because it emerged out of slavery. When slavery was abolished, it didn't disappear. It just changed forms.
One farmer looked at this and said, "We used to own our slaves. Now we just rent them."
The whole industry was still just refusing to recognize that the workers deserve to be treated as human beings. Today, slavery continues to happen, even though it's a crime. One case of modern-day slavery happened in our community. Workers escaped from a U-Haul truck where they were tied with chains.
The defendants have been accused of threatening, slapping, and kicking farm workers, chaining them to a pole, beating them, locking them inside U-Haul trailers, keeping them in debt, and forcing them to work for free.
So as workers, we organized to fight back. When I got involved with the coalition of Immokalee workers, we were focusing on the big tomato growers, thinking that they will have to listen to us.
There were articles about slavery. Our company's name was listed because we're one of the largest growers here in Florida. We've always heard about wage theft, of sexual harassment, of bad operators, but you never think it's going on in your house. When you've got labor contractors providing workers to a farmer, it creates an environment where there's a step back from any responsibility about how they're being treated, how they're being paid.
The growers just closed the door on our nose. They didn't care about our demands or about anything that we had to say. So we need to widen our understanding on what can influence this industry. And then we realized that the market power was with the corporations that buy millions of dollars of tomatoes. These companies want to create a friendly image towards the consumer that buries behind all the abuses that are part of our lives. And we knew that if we bring this message that injustices are going on behind the food that everybody's eating, companies would have to respond. The Coalition of Immokalee Workers started what we call the Campaign for Fair Food. We created alliances all over the country. Students were organizing in support of the workers. So we were able to bring the power of consumers to be part of this fight for our rights.
One of the most encouraging developments has been the emergence of consumers who want to reform the system, who want a more humane system, a more sustainable system. But it doesn't always work because they're up against such powerful corporations that they can be thwarted at every turn. For example, one of the most brutal conditions under which our food animals live are female pigs who spend their lives in a gestation crate, it's called, that is barely bigger than they are. The voters of California voted by a significant margin to outlaw the sale of pork from animals that were living in gestation crates. And the industry would not let that stand. So they took it to the Supreme Court, where they nearly succeeded in getting this law tossed out. So we have allowed these giant consolidated food companies to accumulate so much power that they exercise a veto over the consumer and over the voter. They have also perfected the art of obfuscating the role of the meat industry in climate change. No single food contributes as much to global warming as cattle. And in fact, 1/3 of greenhouse gases are produced by the food system alone. That's second only to transportation. But we're up against a very powerful industry. The food industry spends more on lobbying than the defense industry. That has bought them an incredible measure of power in Congress. But there are corporations out there that fully recognize that the consumer wants to see a different kind of meat industry. The question is, what are these corporations going to do with this? Is this going to drive real change or the appearance of change?
I was a professor at Stanford. My job was basic biomedical research, just trying to understand how cells work, how genes work. I had a sabbatical, and I decided to use it to try to figure out what would be the most impactful thing I could do next. And very quickly, I came to the conclusion that it's to completely replace animals in the food system. Even if we just replaced cows, we could give ourselves a 30-year pause in the rise in greenhouse gases. And possibly more important is that the total number of living mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish on Earth is less than 1/3 what it was 50 years ago. The collapse in global biodiversity is overwhelmingly caused by habitat destruction to graze livestock or raise crops to feed them. And you see it happening in real time when you watch the Amazon burning to expand animal agriculture. So I quit my job at Stanford, the job that I loved. I felt like, okay, well, I gotta do this. You're not gonna solve the problem by trying to persuade people to change their diets. That's never worked. You just have to realize that people aren't gonna stop wanting meat. We're just making it the wrong way. Our first challenge was to understand what makes meat taste like meat. The answer was that animal tissues contain very high levels of a biomolecule called heme, and it turns on the chemistry of meat flavor and aroma. We've genetically engineered a yeast cell to make the heme directly.
Pat Brown's not making a big health claim for his products. It wasn't designed to be a health food. It was designed to fake the meat experience. So this is your not-so-secret ingredient.
You can taste it if you like.
We've done a lot of work thinking about how to bind the burger together, and we needed to make it something so robust that you could stick it on a grill and flip it
And it
without...
wouldn't fall apart?
Wouldn't fall apart, and you could make meatballs with it.
So what was the breakthrough? Can you share that?
Methylcellulose was a really big improvement for us.
Sounds like a tree product.
It is a tree product. Cellulose comes from trees. It's a really abundant molecule in the world.
And where do you get it?
I think it's a byproduct from a lot of the paper industry and wood pulp.
It's cleaned up enough that it doesn't taste like wood
I'm
pulp.
sure not.
Yeah.
This is a facility that has none of the horrors of a slaughterhouse. I think we have a plant-based food with a fraction of the environmental footprint of covering the planet with cows.
You can make a case that the Impossible Burger represents a good alternative to meat as we now produce it. It doesn't have hormones in it, no antibiotics in it. But make no mistake, this is built on commodity agriculture. And it's an ultra-processed food. So there are trade-offs. I like a burger experience as much as the next guy. And if I can have it without implicating a cow and all the problems that come with cows, maybe that's a good thing. We are at a very interesting moment food science is being dedicated to a nobler goal than it has in the past, to move us off of a heavy meat diet onto a more plant-based diet. The Impossible Burger is now in every Burger King in the country. There's a willingness on the part of the consumer to experiment with these products, but they're questionable. They may solve one problem and create another. I think the thing that troubles me most is the implication that this is health food, because the phrase plant-based has this aura of greenness, of health, and that is deceptive.
My relationship with food is complicated, very complicated, because I have type 1 diabetes. You know, I think most of us love food, but we don't have to think about it every day, every hour. I measure my blood sugar before and after every meal, and the simpler I eat, the more level my blood sugar is. As a journalist, I am very much interested in new foods. I needed to find out how they were made, find out what it might mean for my own body.
Is it clean label? Like,
as clean as it gets. Yeah. Our products are 95% mushroom roots with some flavoring.
We've got a super salmon fillet made entirely out of plants without hurting a single fish.
I worry that these new food companies are following the footsteps of big food, with foods that are empty calories, high impact on my blood sugar.
Now, what are the proteins that you're producing?
That's something we can't talk about on camera right now. But
These founders of startups have compelling ideas that they're so passionate about.
So at Sundial Foods, we're making plant-based chicken wings with only 8 ingredients.
And you are the founders of the company?
We're both co-founders. We actually met in a class at UC Berkeley, so all of this started as a school project.
The new food has become the cause for every tech investor. They want something in their playbook that speaks to saving the world.
We produce dairy without a cow.
So we've made molecular coffee. We're the first ones to make it without coffee beans.
So it's the world's first real honey made without bees.
Some of these startups are raising hundreds of millions of dollars. Tyson, JBS, Hormel, they've all invested in alternative meat companies. But what happens down the road? These big companies are only thinking about their profit. What's it going to be like for the everyday consumer walking through the supermarket? How will they navigate the new landscape?
So now food made by scientists has led to cultured meat that is the multiplication of actual meat cells. This really is meat.
So this is called EPIC. When I was practicing as a cardiologist, the question was, what if I practiced for the next 35 years? I would likely be, involved in saving 3,000, 4,000 lives.
Get through this.
But what if we could start saving trillions of animal lives and also positively affecting billions of human lives? When I was working at the Mayo Clinic, we would have patients that would come with a very large heart attack. So we would take stem cells from that patient and we would re-inject them into the heart to regrow the heart muscle. That's where my idea came from, of growing meat directly from animal cells.
I always want to know, how does this product connect to the farmland, to the earth? What's its relation to nature? Here, you're not on any kind of farm. You're back in a lab manufacturing a broth out of amino acids.
So any of these cultivators here can grow chicken or beef or pork or...
The same cultivators
essentially.
and you can put different things in them.
Any species. Essentially, we've got a couple of tanks here that are holding the feed for the cells. And we have a recipe of nutrients for each type of animal we're making.
There's actually chicken in there.
Yeah, there's chicken. Imagine if this is this is a body of an animal.
Right.
Inside of it, there are cells that are growing. Those cells are doubling every 24 hours. And after a certain number of doublings, you have a lot of cells in there. For instance, a cultivator like this, Every 5 days, you can have a batch of meat. Meat of the future could be local, it could be regional. Just like you go out and see beer being made, you could also go and see how your meat's being made. This is all chicken.
I was going to ask you about the ingredient label.
It'll be chicken cells. When we started off, that small piece would be a couple of $1,000s. And the challenge is to make it at a cost that is affordable. Ultimately, in 5 to 10 years, we'll be able to get to prices that are very similar to what people will be used to paying for, let's say, an animal that is butchered.
Right.
Could have fooled me. In fact, we were fooled. We subsequently learned that the chicken breast I sampled did not come from the tanks we were shown, but from a more costly and labor-intensive process. The technology to produce whole-cut chicken at scale is not as close as the industry would have us believe.
If alternative meat products can help shrink the industrial meat system, that'd be great. But I think there is a place for animals in American agriculture, in any agriculture. When it's done sustainably and animals are used in such a way that they're feeding the soil, feeding the plants, that you have this closed loop of animals and plants recycling nutrients, that's a sustainable farm to me. So I don't think the goal needs to be eliminating meat, but we sure need to shrink the meat system. There's no question about that.
Last Friday, I resigned from my position as a Pioneer seed rep so that I can put a lot more focus into this project that's called the Stock Cropper. I think a lot of people will look at it and think, Zach, you're completely insane. It's probably probably well-placed criticism.
With the Stock Cropper, we've devised a farming system that is truly regenerative, good for the soil, good for the environment.
And a more positive direction for the future of agriculture than the one we're currently on.
This barn is mobile so that our animals are always passing into fresh ground, fresh pasture. So we have our ruminant animals out front, like my friend the sheep here. And what their job is to do is to be the lawnmowers and mow down the pasture and process that vegetation. And then following behind the sheep and goats, we have the pigs. The pigs graze on what's left, and their snouts are essentially our tillers to kind of move the soil around and incorporate some of the manures. Our animals are our manure spreaders as we move through the field. And then the annual pasture is allowed to regenerate.
What we're in right now is only about 3 weeks since it was grazed, and we've already got regrowth. So the beauty of this system is we're putting livestock back on the land, but we're doing it in a fashion that holds nutrients in place so they'll be available to next year's crop.
You know, this system is completely different than the conventional system I use on the rest of my farm, where we have to replace a lot of the things that these animals are doing naturally with synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. And the end product is a higher quality, tastier meat animal.
Something that's a premium product to add value to my farming operation.
Well, Zach, until recently, you were a Pioneer dealer.
That's correct, I was.
But you gave it up?
I did. I gave it up.
You gonna take a hit on your income then?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
Because I wanted to wake up in the morning believing what I was doing. I see the path that what the current commodity game is on, and it's a path that it doesn't do a lot of good for the things I'm passionate about, which is the land and water quality and communities. And I could have kept on doing that same stuff, Or I could have said, I've got this alternative system and maybe this will provide some opportunity. And you only live once, take a chance.
And so what do the old boys think when you say, I'm gonna have goats in a cage and give up my Pioneer dealership?
I'm just happy that I can provide entertainment and something for them to talk about in the coffee shop. That's my contribution to the community.
That's good. Yeah.
It's my way to give back. So this is what I mean by Iowa bullion. There's a lot of places in the world that would kill to have dirt like this, and that's why I want to keep every inch of it here on my family's land where it belongs, not blowing in the wintertime into the ditch, or not, washing off, through the low spot into the creek. This is wealth right here.
Right. Well, I mean, the corn looks beautiful, really.
Yeah.
There's definitely an excitement about the stock cropper. I've attracted a lot of other people that farm weird, like myself.
We're gonna walk down through this path here if you follow me. Okay, so this is the original system. We basically did sheep and goats out front, pigs behind.
You can barely smell these hogs.
Come out and watch the pig.
Outside a typical hog confinement building, you'd be retching right now.
And you explain that the animals are feeding the plants and the plants are feeding the animals, and it's all happening in this one space. So you could see the looks in their eyes. They got what we were doing. So now the moment that we've all been waiting for, the new Cluster Cluck Nano here. In order to really truly be scalable, you have to have the ability to have autonomous movement without being here. This is solar powered, electrically driven, on a programmable basis. This is a big deal. And I've got folks that are really interested, but they're also skeptical because they see the challenges to scale this up.
In 1898, we had a tractor.
Yeah.
We could use it. Took clear to the 50s, 1950s, to get rid of the horses.
Right.
So, I mean, you're dealing with a crowd that does not like change.
Yeah, and that's okay, but change comes eventually, and we're hoping that we're betting on the right horse, so to speak.
The biggest issue right now is that the big four meat companies have essentially blocked the path for independent producers to process livestock. And what we need is a shift in policy that makes possible smaller and regional packing facilities. That will open up the floodgates for farmers to get their products to consumers. My passion in this is to create a system where there's more farmers out here like myself being able to feed their family with, instead of thousands of acres, maybe several hundred, and produce high quality food products. That's my dream.
All right, here we go. I used to be a fisherman chasing fish around the globe. You name it, I fished it. Tuna, herring, lobster, cod. It was great, fishing day and night, being in the belly of a boat months at a time. The problem was, I was fishing at the height of industrial extractive, food production. Huge trawlers with half-mile nets ripping up ecosystems. And so we got too good at what we did. The answer everybody told us was fish farming. I was gonna help feed the planet, and I was still gonna be able to work on the water. The smell of fish was still gonna come home with me. So I went out to these pens, and I'm pulling them out. And it's neither fish nor food. They got a gray color, there's sea lice on them. I swear to God, they're stupider than regular fish. And so it's borrowing all the bad practices that are happening on land. Heavy use of pesticides, antibiotics. And this was industrial pig farming out in the ocean. So I ended up just really trying to figure out, how do I be a steward of the sea and switch from pillaging to regeneration? I asked the ocean, what does it make sense to grow? And it says, why don't you grow things that don't swim away, that you don't have to feed, and that breathe life back into the ocean? So I decided to grow kelp. I mean, this is an embarrassing thing for a fisherman to do, right? Growing plants underwater. When I first came down, I was getting laughed off the docks. I lied to people, told them I was growing hemp underwater, which seemed like it was a little better. And you can see the white buoys out there in the distance. That's our 10-acre farm. Below the surface, we're able to pack so many crops along that vertical water column. We have our kelp at one level, then we've got our mussels and our scallops and our oysters and clams. The power of the ocean is that I don't need to fertilize like a corn farmer. You don't need tractors, you don't need buildings, you don't need to buy land. Every one of our oysters, all our kelp, also is restoring our ecosystem. An oyster filters 50 gallons of water a day, and our kelp soaks up 5 times more carbon than land-based plants. I really believe that kelp is going to be the most sustainable food on the planet.
As a chef, I'm always looking for new ingredients, new flavors. Kelp is amazing because not only can I use it like an herb, but also I can saute it really simply the way I would spinach.
Kelp tomates.
Trying new things just needs to become the normal instead of something that's outlandish or weird. You know, sushi wasn't even widely accepted until relatively recently. Kelp is affordable, it's nutritious, it will absolutely be a part of the future of food.
The question is, what kind of industry will we have going forward? Is this going to be about 1,000-acre farms owned by a couple global companies, or is it going to be about thousands of 10-acre farms dotting our coastline? Replication, that's what's powerful, not consolidation. There is another way here that we can be proud of. We got really good at fishing, right? Too good. Maybe we'll really get good at solutions this time around.
Here in Florida, the Fair Food Program has implemented agreements with growers from the agricultural industry. Now there is a code of conduct that guarantees that the abuses that happen will not be tolerated. Workers are protected to speak free of retaliation, and they receive a bonus at the end of the week. So it's an increase in wages.
When we signed the Fair Food Agreement, I got some pretty nasty phone calls from our competitors / friends in the industry. Does it impact my bottom line? Sure. But doing the right thing, running a clean business, is always going to cost more than breaking the fucking law. Today, 90% of the tomatoes being produced in Florida are covered by the Fair Food Agreement.
And 14 corporations that buy from these growers have signed on to it. But not everybody has come on board. Wendy's decided to actually cut purchases from growers for adhering to the Fair Food Program. Instead, they went to Mexico to buy from mega farms that do not respect the rights of the workers.
If Wendy's were to join the Fair Food Program and pay an extra penny a pound to farm workers, it would cost maybe $500,000 a year. It's a tiny portion of their annual revenue and might increase the cost of a Wendy's hamburger by 1/30th of a penny.
There are other corporations that refuse to participate on the Fair Food Program. But if they would sign on to it, then we would see an increase in wages of almost double. And now the Fair Food Program has become the blueprint for labor relationships in many other parts of the country.
In Latin America, many countries are making progress to reduce consumption of ultra-processed foods. In Chile, they used black warning labels saying too much sugar, too much saturated fat, too much calories. And in Mexico, for instance, they say if a product has a warning label, they cannot have any other thing saying the product is good. No health claims. In Brazil, every day we have 40 million meals prepared in public schools.
Tudo é bem fresquinho, bem feitinho, com amor e carinho. E fica saboroso também.
E é como você faz em casa, né?
É como eu faço em casa.
The Brazilian dietary policy is that real food is essential, cooking is essential, and basically avoiding ultra-processed foods. Children that have access to this program really are acquiring healthy eating habits.
Esses estudantes também consomem menos refrigerante, salgadinhos de pacote, na escola e fora da escola.
O dia inteiro.
Exatamente.
This program promotes the demand for healthy foods. The municipalities, they are obliged by law to buy unprocessed and minimally processed foods. And they should buy 30% of food from local family farmers. As escolas no Brasil, elas se transformaram num lugar de resistência contra esse poder avassalador dessas grandes corporações. E o Brasil, nesse aspecto, pode ensinar um monte de coisas para o resto do mundo.
Normally, school districts purchase food from a distribution company, but the Camden City School District is now providing food direct from the farmers to the table right in our school cafeterias.
We have asparagus fries today with Parmesan.
It's so successful. There are more students selecting salads than ever. There was a time where they're going to walk past it, get a cheeseburger, get tenders, get whatever. To be able to serve fresh produce straight from the farm, it makes all the difference in the world. It makes them want to come to school.
Yeah.
We're partnering with the Common Market to build relationships with our local farmers.
So those were grown on farms near here. We saw there needed to be a link that connected communities like ours with the abundance of farmland and the abundance of good food that's grown in our region. It's largely federal policy that is supporting these large multinational companies who are selling cheap and processed food. Programs like ours demonstrate the kind of policy change that we want to see. Policy that's beneficial for both farmers in rural places and urban consumers.
Buenos dias.
Do you feel good about hearing today?
Yeah. The coalition around these nutrition issues has grown from family farmers to civil rights activists to environmental justice people that see this potential coalition that could really make real change.
Good luck.
Thank you very much.
I'm now the chairperson of a powerful subcommittee on nutrition. And I want to be a part of letting people know a lot of these pressing realities that moved me to want to deal with our food system. So it's a tremendous privilege and responsibility to focus Washington on an issue that I believe is at the center of human life, American life.
Now let's be clear,
The majority of our food system is being now controlled by just a handful of big multinational corporations. These food companies carefully formulate and market nutrient-poor, addictive, ultra-processed foods, which now comprise 2/3 of the calories in children and teens in their diets in the United States. And these companies want us to believe that the resultant diet-related diseases, such as obesity and diabetes, are somehow a moral failing, that they represent a lack of willpower or a failure to get enough exercise. That is just a lie. It's a lie. And so I believe we need to rethink the way we approach food and nutrition policy. Our lives literally depend upon it. By fixing our food system, we will create health and well-being in every aspect of our lives. But the forces of Washington right now are really invested in sustaining these broken systems because it's creating big profit for very powerful interests.
Tyson Foods in the last quarter of 2021, their net income rose from $469 million to $1.2 billion. That's one quarter, okay?
I've got a piece of legislation right now to put more transparency on those big meatpacking companies and have a special investigator with subpoena power, make sure these folks aren't doing antitrust activities. But make no mistake, there's gonna be a lot of money thrown against me. They're gonna say, we're not gonna let some big mouth senator from Montana stop us. And so, bring it on, guys.
How'd the hearing go?
Really well.
Yeah.
Now we're being filmed doing an illegal activity. We're jaywalking here.
I think the light's gonna change for us, maybe?
You think so? Sometimes the law has to catch up to where you are.
That's right.
But I really think that this is a moment in history where we can expand the innovations going on in the American food system to show people that there's a better way of doing this.
It's all doable. It's all fixable if we tackle the big problem of antitrust and agricultural policy. We need to change the incentives so the government is subsidizing healthy calories, not unhealthy calories. Just imagine if the government decided to step in on the side of the consumer and the citizen rather than on the side of the big food companies.
We had a pandemic and saw how brittle things were. So let's create resiliency by empowering the folks that raise their food in our local and regional food systems.
The future doesn't have to be cornfield after cornfield. If we want to see change happen, we have to change
agricultural policy.
We get the right policy, and we'll start taking care of our soils, which in turn makes healthy food. Like, it's not rocket science.
This is our chance to chart a new course. We can actually grow good food, create good jobs, while we're also healing the planet. And that's sort of the world I'd love to live in.
I want to see everybody treated fairly. We are the ones that make this company successful. Who runs this Taco Bell? We do! I want to see life. I want to see people living life, not just fighting to survive.
We can have a food system that produces healthy food for consumers, that provides a safe workplace and decent wages to workers, that treats animals like they're living beings and not industrial commodities, that treats the land in a way that's sustainable and not destructive. We not only can do it, we have to.
This land is your
To the